My name is Philipp Schrögel. I am a researcher in science communication here at Heidelberg University, and I have the pleasure to moderate the panel and the discussion with our panelists, our speakers, and especially with you in the audience. We want to really have the session to be quite interactive as this online webinar session setting allows, but we'll try our very best. If you attended the previous lightning talk session, there was already a lot of discussion on target groups and also formats of science communication. I guess we can build on that. There might be some overlap, but please don't hesitate to put any comments and also insights you want to elaborate on here in the Q&A. So that's the session, that's the setting. I don't know why I get that wrong all the time. You probably know it already from the conference. We are going to talk, so this is our privilege. Thanks a lot for you to conferring this privilege to us, but you have the opportunity to put your questions in the Q&A, and then you have the opportunity to vote also on other questions. We see those questions that getting more upvotes are appearing on top, and we're trying to address that here on the panel. And my co-moderation, Fabian Werle, will also have a look at your comments, and we're trying then to address them on the panel and really more interactively, not question answer back, but really picking up your comments. If that means that I probably miss some remark and we haven't addressed it at the very end, please post a hint again and say, hey, there was this important thing and you didn't talk about it. Now it's really time. So we do that after that. The setting will be that our four presenters, and I'm going to introduce them directly before their short input, they will each give some thoughts, short impulses of 5 to a maximum 7 minutes. And I really have a look on the time. And after that, you have the opportunity to ask questions directly to that format, but really 1 or 2 and really questions that don't trigger discussion, but really questions for clarification. What does that mean? Where's the study from? What is the reference to that number? Like really these short, brief questions, we're going to address them directly. And then afterwards, we join a discussion altogether. I think that's it. I took enough of your discussion time, and we really want to get to the content. I'm really thankful that you joined our panel and you get to know them one by one. We start with the first presenter, Marianne Achiam. She's professor at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. And I'm going to have to read that not to get it wrong, because that's also very embarrassing for a moderator. The research interest is the dissemination of the natural sciences, primarily biology, in out-of-school learning environments such as museums, science centers, aquariums, zoos, etc., etc. So there's much more information than that. I got actually a whole page of information. I cut that out. You definitely have the chance to click on her profile on the conference website, and of course also she has a university website, so don't hesitate to do that. And she's going to talk about a research perspective on target groups and science communication. And please, we're very much looking forward to your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Philip, and thank you to all the organizers of this nice conference. So I hope you are seeing my slide now. Yes, excellent. All right, well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Marianne, and that was a very nice introduction I just got there. I'm just going to credit also my postdoc student, Sabrina Witting-Serup, who's on this slide also because she helped me prepare this brief impulse for today. All right, but so I was asked to say something very briefly about a research perspective on target audiences of science communication. And what sort of immediately comes to my mind when I hear the term target audiences is something like this, right? A bullseye, a clearly delimited, clearly defined target that can be struck or impacted by something. In this case, it's an arrow, of course. But I think if we think about science communication from a research perspective, these associations are really not that far off the mark. So I'm just sharing with you here 3 kind of well-known science communication research models. And even though they progress from paradigm 1 to paradigm 3 here, we see that scientists and audiences are sort of depicted here as these well-defined, well-delimited entities with no overlap between them. And the relationship between them in all 3 cases, even though there is some kind of progression in these models, is one of arrows like we saw before, right? So there is something being transferred in one direction or the other between these delimited entities. So I think the problem with models like these that we do use in science communication research is that they're probably a bit too simplistic to really capture what goes on in science communication. And I think especially with respect to target audiences, I think they kind of imply some things about audiences that are not really that useful. So I'd like to invite you now to just step into a brief moment of my everyday life. I'm just going to read a very short narrative to you that kind of illustrates that point. So, so just bear with me for a moment here. I'm at the university. I'm reading. At the moment, I'm interested in arguments for seeing research on science communication as situated knowledge or knowledge in context without becoming completely relativist. Who am I? In this case, I'm a scientist. It's Saturday. I'm visiting an exhibition at the aquarium in order to see how they communicate Sustainable Development Goal number 4, quality education, and Sustainable Development Goal number 14, life below water. It might be a good example for my upcoming research article, but it might also just be a fun day out for me. Who am I? Well, in this case, I'm a museum visitor, part of the statistic, or maybe I'm a researcher examining the exhibit. I go home to be with my family. My daughter and I watch Science Max on YouTube. He's building a rocket car, and he explains that fossil fuels are made from dinosaurs. Who am I? I'm a parent in this case, watching science communication unfold. Or maybe I'm a science communication researcher who happens to be watching a show with my child. Finally, I'm at the library getting ready to give a talk that has been planned for weeks. The posters are prominently placed around the library. My first slide has a picture of a garden on it. The garden is a metaphor, I explained to the audience. Who am I in this case? Am I a practice-based science communicator? Am I a scientist communicating science? And who's listening? The public? What about my colleague listening from the back row who knows more about the subject than I do? Is she also part of the public? All right, the end to this brief narrative. I just want to finalize this brief impulse by saying that what I think these examples show, and what you undoubtedly all know, is that at any given time, we can all be experts, parents, caregivers, teachers, passive recipients, or active participants. And so when we talk about science communication, and especially when we talk about something like target audiences, I think we need to think about them in ways that go beyond these traditional science communication models. We need to account for the complexity of science communication in practice, rather than trying to oversimplify the situation with models of boxes and circles and arrows that we know from perhaps other sciences. So I'll end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation and these thoughts. I'll wait some seconds if there's an immediate question for clarification. Okay, I would say if it would take that long to formulate the question, it isn't a short question for clarification. So I guess we move on and then address all the things and thoughts that this has triggered in the discussion afterwards. So thanks a lot, Marianne. And now we're looking towards a more practitioner's perspective. Also, you already, well, you already raised the question, can we distinguish between the researcher's perspective and the practitioner's perspective? For the sake of the argument, please, for this panel, at least for the next question, let me try to do that. The second presenter is Vanessa Mignan, and she's an independent consultant and trainer for science communication for science engagement institutions, and has her own company based in Paris, France. And her passion is science engagement, and she loves to mix different people and approaches in order to create inclusive spaces for novel encounters with knowledge. And again, all the other things that I neglected here in my very short introduction, well, ask her directly or look it up online. And well, we're looking forward to your thoughts and impulse.
Thank you, Philipp, and thank you, Marianne, for your very nice presentation. So if you are very good with accents, you will know that I'm French. And I've tried to disguise it so many times and not just like embrace the Frenchness in me. Marianne, I'm a city girl, so I didn't use the bow and arrow, I used darts. But it's the same principle. I've been a practitioner for more than 10 years, and many different roles. I did science facilitation, and I also did media training for scientists, or training for scientists that will work with children after that, or things like that. And of course, target group evoke bows, arrows, and darts. And like darts, there are techniques, or people tell you that there are techniques to be a good champion in darts. And most often, if we keep with this comparison, they will tell you have to identify your key messages, you frame your message, decide on an audience, and you have to use those nice tricks that keep the audience captive, or you try not to be boring, if we try to simplify that. And I think there is a limitation with this dart or bow example, is that when you reach for a target, you can see if you miss or not the target, and this is not so evident in science communication. You don't know if your message was really transferred, you don't know how your message was received, you don't know if your message was empowering, if it was sensitive of different culture, if the people who you were expecting to have this message receive it really, or maybe you have this new audience that you don't know about, and you don't know how this message is used, because science communication can be also tools for people to use in their own life in different ways. And this is, for me, the main problem with targeting. It is a one-way process. And the same way when you throw a dart, you have this one-way projectile, if you're good. You only do a one-way process when you're doing targeting in science communication. And my experience when I moved from this targeting, that was most of the time coming from external people, so people who give you money for your project, different calls, and also the way we think we have to evaluate programs. You see your audience more as partners sometimes than really targets. You also see that your message change, because in this process of dialogue, co-construction, it has many different names. You cannot be the same person, have the same message, and reach the same people. You have to change. And the question I'm working on at this moment is about neutrality, objectivity, because I think sometimes we believe that we have to be objective, neutral in science communication, and we hide behind it to not take stands and to not really think about our practice as something that can change and can be political and evolved. So that's something I would love to talk with you about, and I will stop here so we have time for discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for these thoughts. As again, if there's any immediate question, we'll wait some seconds. Otherwise, these were 10 gifted seconds of silence, something very rare during Zoom meetings. So enjoy, and we also take these thoughts later on into the discussion, and looking at another perspective that's probably also somewhere between practice and research. The third presenter will be Barbara Streicher. She's Managing Director of the ScienceCenter-Netzwerk based in Vienna, Austria. And she has a passion for hands-on communication, research-based learning, playful dialogue formats, participation, and network structure, and is committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion in science engagement. And she'll talk about these experiences from her work, I guess.
Thank you, Philipp. Yes, I'll start with some practical examples, and there'll be some guidance through this, linking it into what Marianne and Vanessa already talked about. I'll focus on practical examples for how to reach underserved adult audiences, trying to find out what are their barriers. Why do people not engage with science who would like to engage and engage with them? So think about a mother of a child, migrant background, she probably does not have the time because her day is filled with other things and the question of priorities. She might not have access to all the offers of science engagement and science communication that are out there. She might not feel a connection to science because the way science is framed is sometimes very abstract and we don't often see the practical empowerment. And then there's the empowerment. Do I really know something about science? And this is about creating spaces of knowledge. So I'll give you a few examples of how we try to tackle those barriers. This is a picture from a workshop that we did last week where we thought, well, where do people spend their time? And this is linking up with a social organization that does language learning classes. So what we did is we went there and talked to the women there, asking them what kind of relevance would there be? And there was photography, there was chemistry and dyes and all the things. And that's the kind of workshop where we did not take any more of their time, but some of them came and wanted to spend more time with us. The other thing, constraint, is the access. This is something that a project that you might have heard about that we've been doing for years now is the so-called knowledge room, a very accessible space because we go into empty spaces where people can just walk in. So it's very local, it's a familiar place, and we also try to have a social encounter there with familiar objects and things. We'll go to a third idea of how can we connect people with science. This is a picture of something I'm a bit embarrassed about because that was our approach in 2010, and I wouldn't do it again that way. It was a soccer tournament, and we wanted to talk about HIV/AIDS. So we sort of baited them with music, with buffet, and then with a discussion, the panel, really old-fashioned panel discussion on HIV/AIDS. Yes, they came, but I wouldn't do it that way again because it was cheating, I would say. How we try to build trust today is a long-term process. So in that kind of project that we tried for intercultural science engagement, we went into that and said, well, if we want to engage with cultures, maybe we should focus on calendars because that's a topic that is fascinating in all different cultures we can compare. So what we did is we went to those communities, was Persian Afghan communities, drank tea with them, went into their communities, invited them into our space, so built trust. Then we talked with them and asked them, well, would you like to co-create something on calendars? And they said, no, it does not touch our heart. So my colleague who did that work, who had a connection to that community, was at the loss first, and then he talked to them and they came to something where they said, this is where our heart is on. And this was Omar Khayyam. I don't know if you're familiar with him, I wasn't. This is a Persian scientist from the 11th century, who was not only a scientist, but also a philosopher, a musician, an artist in many ways. And this is what their co-creation was about then in the end. So it was a group of people who set up an event for their family, for friends, for people from outside their community. And they mixed all the different perspectives of Omar Khayyam, brought it into with music. Some of them did their first presentation in such a manner, so there was a lot of empowerment there. And that's the way we could reach them and really build a connection. But what this tells us is what are the barriers for our engagement as science communicators with probably adult, underserved audiences. It's the same. It takes a lot of time to connect, to build those connections. We need access to the communities. We can't do it on our own. We need to go to gatekeepers, to social organizations who are in contact. We need to understand what the connections is, where their interest lies, and we need to start acknowledging knowledge that's out there and share our power. And this is a difficult process for us coming from probably our background as scientists ourselves. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for this presentation and these thoughts. So there's one question in the chat. I think it's getting a bit more broad, so I would actually leave that for our joint discussion. It's about online communication. I guess all the others can also add to that. I hope the audience is okay. Well, they cannot deny it because they can speak. I'm very sorry. I hope it's okay for you. Again, but any immediate questions to clarify the presentation? Okay, so this is very specific, and probably we can expand on that later on. So what, Barbara question, what would you do differently regarding the football HIV example?
I guess that would be a longer discussion, but I would
trigger it, perhaps.
I would go into a longer process and not have a one-time event. I think one-time events can be a start of something, but you need to go further.
Okay, thanks a lot. There's also one thing I forgot to mention, and John was the first person to post something in the chat, reaching out to Marianne individually. So you have seen it on this conference platform. You have the opportunity to book individual appointments with all other conference participants. So if you have a very specific request, can try to book an appointment. Of course, they have to have time at this time with our speakers afterwards. So if you don't want to send an email and wait, maybe, I don't know, if they answer a week later or something, you can try to book an appointment afterwards if you have a longer discussion or individual thing you want to discuss with any of our speakers. So just to highlight this opportunity. But last but not least, for the fourth perspective now on this panel, and there are already 3 other questions that we are going then to address in the joint discussion. We're looking forward to a fourth short impulse on the perspective of our institution, a university. Our presenter is Patrick Honecker. He's currently Director of Communications and Marketing at Cologne University. And he's also a systemic coach, and he has his own podcast, Summit of Education, together with the German journalist Jan-Martin Viada. So we are looking forward to your thoughts on, well, target groups, audience needs, and so on.
Yeah, I have to find my presentation. One moment, please. I've got it. Right here. Can you see that? Wonderful. First of all, I have really to say I'm really impressed by the previous speakers, especially by the shortness. Maybe I'm a little bit too short, too strong, too long. Please stop me, Philip. Don't hesitate to do that right now. Everyone, very fine to be here. Good afternoon. My name is Patrick, and I'm responsible for communication and marketing. Philip mentioned it before. And I'm honored to talk about challenges in science communication, especially biases, because I have to organize it in this institution at the University of Cologne. And there are some, I think, special challenges for me. First of all, how do we communicate science? I'll start it. Our mission to enhance the relationship among science. I don't know what happened here. Right now better? Yeah. To enhance the. Hey! It's faster than me. I don't understand what happened right here. Okay. it's no.
Looks like the auto advance might be activated in PowerPoint.
No, I don't know why. But maybe, okay, I try again. I think, first of all, our mission is to enhance the relationship among science, media, and the public, and to ensure that public discussions and political decisions are informed by solid evidence-based research that's clear. To maintain trust in science, scientific expertise is very important. I think this is the overarching aim of both science PR and science communication. There are certainly, I think, some other good reasons as well, like fostering enthusiasm for science, attracting funding, and strengthening our institution's reputation. But I will go more in details later on. We start with a 3-pillar public outreach strategy that's divided into science PR, it's marketing, and science communication. And I would like to explain what is the difference. In my opinion, PR is especially organization related. Marketing is market and I would say brand oriented. For example, as an employer brand, and science communication is only committed to science. I think the goal is to strengthen society's knowledge and trust in science. And what are these challenges? You see this father and his son or daughter, and the most important point is maintaining trust. Let me point out a few challenges of science communication, especially in the digital age. In the digital age, I think scientific communication is undergoing dramatic change. Today's scientists can no longer afford to limit their communication to a narrower community of peers. The opportunities this opens are undisputed, yes. Through digitalization, scientists have more possibilities to communicate and be transparent about how they work and how they arrive at their results. But making use of social media, scientists can partake in the societal discourse as experts. They play a vital role in public debates. Everybody knows in Germany, for example, Christian Drosten. He's a well-known virologist for everybody who doesn't know him. They are in high demand because they are considered trustworthy. And as I mentioned before, the most important thing is to maintain this trust. Our relation to truth have become uncertain in times of fake news or the post-factual age. For the moment, the focus of these debates has mainly been on antagonism of extreme individuals or political groups towards the media and democratic institutions. As we have seen, scientists still enjoy a high degree of trust. The ID will confirm that with respect to the truthfulness of statements, but there are also tendencies towards the opposite. All the digital developments that enrich science communication can also have the opposite effect. I think we all know the central problem social media pose for objective communication. Everyone is stuck in or his or her echo chamber and simply refuses to acknowledge anything that contradicts this. Public debates are increasingly polemic and a matter of belief rather than facts. Science still plays an important role in this game as a powerful argument, but for each question, there's a contradicting assessment, and for each study, there's another study yielding different results. Everybody looks for those studies which supports their own point of view and then cites these. That way, even the crudest opinion can be voiced and voiced and supported. See, for example, the case of climate change or migration or up-to-date COVID-19 deniers. Interestingly, however hardly anyone claims the science itself is unnecessary or wrong, the question is rather what individuals or groups of people that miss science. Nobody would say, I don't care what scientists say. Rather, they will say, this is what my scientists say. And what biases are important to know. I think you know the famous masterpiece of Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. Kahneman, the winner of the Nobel Prize for Economics, he vividly describes a lot of biases. Just a few examples, the framing effect. That means the information is processed in our brains also depends on the words that we are used. The sentence 50% of teachers are against inclusion at schools will be processed differently when half of all teachers are in favor of inclusion. Or another bias, the confirmation bias. We tend to select information and arguments that confirm what we already believe. So if we want to question our own convictions, we have to search for information that goes against what we already know and believe. Easier said than done. Or very nice, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Human beings tend to overestimate their competencies and also their level of knowledge. Paradoxically, this effect increases the less competent or knowledgeable the person in question is. And illusory causation, if event A coincides with or is shortly followed by event B, we tend to get the impression of a direct relationship between the two. A very prominent example is vaccine damage. Somebody who becomes ill after a shot maybe believe it caused the illness, and even if they are two completely unrelated. And false information, the last one, we should never underestimate the impact of false information or fake news. This information also impacts our brain without us becoming consciously aware of it and creates a memory. One of our very prominent professors in Cologne, Axel Oxenfeld, an economist, put it this way: the benchmark of success for a message is not whether or not it's true, but rather how many clicks or likes it got, the attention is generated. Our response, and when I will end, so what can we do? We have to build up a three-pillar model, I think. First of all, we have to know what influences our target groups and what kind of biases are possible. But in addition, we need to establish a science communication that is more independent and, as I would say, more self-critical. We have right now established a press and communication department. We have established a marketing department, and we plan Science Communication Center, and this Science Communication Center would work independence from other institutions, explaining the value of evidence-based research for and in society for a broader public, and a strong focus has to be on the explanation of the methods. Finally, instead of promoting all research activities at the UOC, at the University of Cologne, the SCC would contribute to relevant societal issues and public debates with the aim of enriching these discussions with evidence-based research findings. Maybe this could be a kind of solution for these problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think since you were the last speaker, we can go directly into the general discussions, and we have specific discussions attributed towards Patrick Honecker. You can also address them. So there are already quite some questions here in the Q&A section. And for our discussion, I would like to go back to the basics. And there's one question in the chat that also addresses that. Konstantin Kiprianov posted that, and it's the kind of general question: what's actually how isolated can and should you define target groups? So he's talking about, wouldn't it be better to conceptualize the audience as a continuum? And this is what some of you were already alluding to making a strong argument for that in your talks. He's mentioning for example, the quadruple helix model. I guess they're even arrived at the quintuple helix model. So it's like science, society, politics, and industry all embedded in environment. The question I would like to address towards the panel, and then please raise your hands who wants to address that. There's this famous statement, I think it's helpful, so all models are wrong, but some models are useful. So what's the usefulness? Because if you are very inclusive and say all is a continuum and you can say nothing about anybody because everybody's an individual, well, how do you actually approach communication as an institution, as an individual scientist, when you basically have to talk to, I don't know how many million or 1,000 individuals? So is there something to say, okay, you can go so far and there is actually a benefit of having some kind of broad structures, or how to approach that? And also these different roles, is it, yeah, how would you answer to that question and that suggestion?
I can start if
Please.
you want. What I always try to say to people is that we need modelization to create. We need metaphors, and they have to stay also tools, not way of thinking. So of course you need some time to think about a participant to create an activity, and you will. And usually that's for me the main problem. And I think Emily Dawson mentioned it in some of her research before, is the ideal participant. So when you design, you think that your audience have no social disadvantage, they know how to talk in public. When you say A, they all respond B, and this is for me problematic. But you need tools to create, and you can use them, but don't get stuck into a vision on the one-dimensional participants, I would say. And also you have to evaluate, and if you evaluate during your project and not only at the end, you're also able to refine your models as well.
Thanks a lot. Any other? Oh yes, Marianne, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thank you for that question also. Yeah, so I agree with Vanessa. I think maybe if I could add to that, I think the models that we see now, these kind of simplistic models, might be sort of holdovers from the natural sciences, where we try to symbolize everything in ways and try to control all the variables. And I think we should remind ourselves that any kind of human activity like science communication is much more complex than what we usually would model with things like that. And so I think the person asking the question, what is your name? I don't see it right now, sorry. But the idea of having a kind of ecosystem model, I think, even though I don't know that model, I think thinking about this as an ecosystem of science communication is quite valuable. So I think without knowing that model, I would support that. I think acknowledging different ways of knowing about science, and I think that's also what Vanessa is saying, really engaging with one another, not just seeing scientists as one party and audiences as the other, is probably the way to go. So yeah, just my brief 5 cents on that.
Thanks a lot. So his name was Konstantin. I moved his question already to the. We are going to address it in the video. One comment from the audience, and then Patrick. And so Carl was writing, by defining your audience, you're much more likely to create effective communication and engagement for that audience. So plea for actually thinking really who you want to reach and address that. Or do you agree, Patrick, or was it something else?
Yeah, I agree totally. But maybe it's not enough to talk about the target and about the scientist as people who wants to get in contact with this target group, but also about the methods. Maybe I think this is certainly not the ultimate solution, but as the structures in which scientists work and arrive at the results are often not so easy to understand. And maybe we could explain that more, because a lot of scientists are not so familiar to explain the kind of work in science is getting forward. And we have seen it in Germany, as we talked about this problematic with the pandemic situation here. And if we explain more what kind of different explanations are possible, it's much easier for the audience to understand.
Any more thoughts? Otherwise, I would take on an additional aspect that might be very interesting, and it's probably building also on Patrick's comment. So Galina was posting the question or the comment, who's responsible for communication trustworthiness. So it's a specific aspect, but I guess it applies more general. For example, are the authors of research on this occasion, if they are getting shot as messengers, if they're getting feedback or critique online or shitstorms or whatever. So the question is also like, who is defining target groups? So are there, should every researcher have that, or is it on an individual level, or what are your thoughts on that before we then also the whole online question? There's also another aspect we were going to address afterwards. So maybe to have the question more specific in the projects you are working with, and if it's your own projects at your own institution, or if you're consulting, do you define target groups at the project level? Do you talk with the individual participants? How does this work to align this understanding of who you want to reach, or you want to you want to engage with, or get in dialogue with? Do you have any?
I can also start with this one. For me, as a practitioner, it started as a funder level. We have these calls coming from the city or private partners, and they will say, we are looking for organizations that can develop activities for children between this and that from these specific areas, for example. Or you have disability, so this labeling as a practitioner started from the calls, because I studied science communication, and it was more like adult children in a non-diverse approach to it. Like, okay, you can do science communication for adult or children, but then it gets specific with the calls. And then it was also a way of knowing what you are doing and knowing who is your non-audience, because you have to name the people who are not participating in your activities. And I think we're still struggling with different words. We have underserved, we have hard to reach, and nobody is really happy with all this terminology, I think. But I think it's also say a lot about our community and the fact that we don't really know our audiences or a non-audience, because we can't name them.
Thanks a lot, Marianne, and then Patrick.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that I think especially if you're working in some kind of project, I would guess that who you're communicating to is always quite context dependent, right? So it depends on what kind of project you're doing, who might be the stakeholders in that, how can you get them engaged? I think all those things kind of shape the way you think about your target audience, if that's what we're calling them. So I think it's difficult to give general answers to that question, but I think you would always think about the specific situation you are in and who you want to reach with that with that science communication.
Yeah, I would like to add some kind of political view of that, because in my opinion, this term target group is very accepted at the general management of higher education institutions, also at the strategic board, and so they love this topic because it sounds like power and to convince people, and so. And I prefer more terms like stakeholders or participants or partners, also because we work together with these different peoples outside the university, and we have to accept that these people have to understand us, but also we have to understand them. That's very important for us. And maybe it's a question of the hierarchy level you're at in your institution, because as you higher you are, you more prefer this term target group. It's my opinion.
So Vanessa, did you put your hand down deliberately, or do you want to add something? And Barbara?
I just wanted to add a little something. It's sometimes, especially as a consultant, people have a very capitalistic approach of audiences, and they want to put a little bit of this community in the basket, and this and that and that. And I think that's the problem with targeting. As you say, partners or stakeholders is also helping people moving forward this idea of picking people and designing a nice painting in their organization.
Thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, Vanessa took a little bit of my point. I was going to say that it makes sense to concentrate on a group and stay with them for a while. That's what I was wanting to get across. It's no use doing a project here and there and elsewhere. And we just had a campaign with our partners in our Austrian network, and we realized it was really a good thing to start. It was about misinformation of. But we had different target groups because all of us have different target groups, and the way we reacted, so the message we could get across was smaller than the one with which we all had focused on something. So coming back to who has the power to decide that, in my ideal world, it would be the groups themselves that say, we want to be involved. And like more the involving engagement groups than saying, we target you. In the same way that Marianne presented the models, obviously, why not say we want to be a group involved with that and listen to what's out there?
Thank you very much. So we already have now a lot of questions in the Q&A session. And so I was thinking of having at least 3 aspects to cover. One of the questions was addressed specifically towards Barbara, but I wanted to address it anyway, so I'd also like to others, how the whole online communication has changed that. Then there are 2 or 3 questions regarding, you already all touched on that, but to elaborate on that, underrepresented, not present audiences, mistrust in various communities, and all these aspects. And for the rest here in our webinar audience, if you want to have a specific focus that we also addressed in our last half hour, please make use of the voting tool regarding the questions, then also we see what your priorities here are. So let's talk internet. Patrick mentioned already some theoretical aspects on trust and digitalization, but to all the others, like how do your answers, or do your answers, previous answers differ if you say you take the whole thing online, not face-to-face interactions, because target audiences, and specifically that term, are, well, especially in online contexts, very present, and you get targeted advertising, and you just bought a fridge, maybe you need another fridge, maybe not. So there are a lot of misuses, but also a lot of possibilities. Like, what are your thoughts and experiences on that? And please, whoever wants to go first.
I can start with this one, because obviously the online world amplifies interests. So what we see also especially in the last year, is that those that are already interested in science communication offers get more of it, and a lot more during the last years, and those that had neither time nor interest nor something to do with it, were not in these kinds of bubbles, are further away than they were before. So we see those groups drifting apart, if they're groups at all. What the question that I read about, well, how can you deal with disadvantaged groups who are also usually disadvantaged in the online world? So we have the digital divide that separates a lot of people along those lines as well. So it's amplifying this. there is no good solution, because with hard to reach group, or however you want to define them, it's even more difficult to start a connection with them online. So again, it's about building coalitions with others, with gatekeepers. What we realized worked for us if we have a physical connection first, and if we trust the trust is already there from the physical world, we can transfer it. So we invited people to use our social media channels and then invite their friends in. That's how we could enlarge the audience a little bit. But again, I come back, it's a very time-consuming and a deliberate effort to not go for the easy hanging fruits, because these are the people who are already looking out and seeking SciComm information.
Any other thoughts, or otherwise I would add one comment also, or a comment, it's actually a question, maybe it's also part of the answer. So Anna Carolina was asking about not science communication between scientists and whatever form of audience directly, but with other intermediaries or intermediators, like educators, and also like something Barbara mentioned, like having community members maybe as intermediaries. So what role do you see for them in communication, also creating access? And from the original question from Anna Carolina, also like how would a co-production work when it's getting even more complicated, because you don't have your interaction group or your audience, but then there's intermediaries and all these. It's getting really, really complex again. So how do you deal with that, or what are your thoughts on that? Yes, please, Marianne.
Yeah, so maybe I can have a go at that. But I think about these intermediators as having actually a few advantages in relation to science communication. For one thing, as you mentioned, Anna Carolina, they are not themselves scientists, so they might have perspectives on science that are more similar to called regular people. So they might be better able to see science from the outside, to see what are the challenges about engaging in science and what perspectives might other kinds of people bring to science encounters than scientists, right? And I think another advantage they have is the institutions that they function within. So I think all these different kinds of science education institutions, natural history museums, science centers, etc., all have different kind of institutional specificities that really create quite good opportunities for science engagement. So these intermediaries, I think, are well positioned to engage people with the strengths of the institutions that they are within, right? So if it's natural history museums, I mean, objects from the collections can tell interesting stories about what has happened in the past and perhaps how the climate is changing now. Science centers can engage people in experiences and so on and so forth. So I think these intermediators need to play to their own strengths and not, I guess I would say, not worry too much about not being scientists. I know that's easy to say, but I think that is actually a strength, another perspective that they have.
Patrick?
Yeah, I think the most important science communicators are the scientists themselves, but not every scientist is a very good at explaining what we are actually doing. That's the problem, and I think as an institutional communicator, it's my task also to empower the scientists on different levels to do such a good work of science communication with trainings, with coachings. That's was the reason because I made this coaching vocational training, because I said I have to empower scientists to do the work, and not as a spokesperson of the university, I'm right, but the scientists themselves can convince these people outside with their own work. That's more important than everything, I would say.
You actually mentioned a very important point that also touches on something that has been mentioned by two people, and I want to bring that together. The question, Schreier posed the question, and I summarize briefly, or the comment that it would actually be necessary to also have diverse communicators or scientists themselves, as and then John made the same point: public connections, direct connection, and then also this diversity of communicators and scientists themselves would come into play. But, and to make it a challenging question, we don't want to address the low-hanging fruit here, as someone already mentioned. Like, how do you balance that? Because Patrick, you probably know that from some other university, of course, not yours. If you have a diverse set of communicators and scientists, but you have the strategical settings of the university, of the presidents that probably have a whole different interest? Or I don't know, Vanessa, you've worked with institutions. Maybe there's also some resentment on the very high level. Like, how do you get change actually going? That just hiring some intern that is somewhat diverse doesn't really change the communication setting of our institution. So do you have any revolutionary thoughts on that here on the panel?
Yeah,
or non-revolutionary?
We were a little bit lucky because we are the winners of an important prize here in Germany. It's the prize for university communication awarded by the German Rectors Conference, and we have developed a systematic monitoring system, and we monitor social issues and have established a network of matrix correspondents, how we call it, matrix correspondents. And these correspondents are located in different scientific fields and at the same time closely involved in my department. You see, they work near the science areas, and sometimes they are scientists of these fields and have some kind of special education in science communication too. And they are also in these strategic area involved. And that's interesting for us. It's very accepted in the scientific area because they are near at the science, and also they don't to give kind of more money in the system. It's often the problem because they said, okay, low fruits, they get it for free because we have the money earned by the third wave funding here in Germany.
No, before I go to Marianne, I would like to push back on one aspect to Patrick. So, but how about the diversity in this group? Because maybe they bridge gaps between communicators and researchers, but then again, are they the same like me, like you? Like, we're probably pretty part of the problem. Or do you see any access points? Like, of course, like you can't throw people out, but it's also obvious, right? And people doing good jobs, but how to make connections? Is there any? But you can think, Marianne, maybe you have also some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll think while I say this other point I had, but I think your point is well made. I think that if there is kind of institutional resistance to these kinds of movements, it's difficult to do anything. So I think the keywords are both bottom up and top down initiatives, right? I mean, it is possible for individuals, firebrands maybe, to make changes to their institutions. But of course, I mean, management needs to also do kind of top down initiatives to support that development. Right now, there is a lot of decolonization stuff going on in museums, in universities, and other places. So I think there's going to be increased attention to this, and I think if we want to get on board with this movement, it's about also paying attention to what's going on at our own institutions and getting involved there as well.
Maybe I can apologize to Patrick for putting him so on the spot, because actually your university is an example of how approaching that, like as far as I see it from the outside, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but probably you don't. I see you're doing a lot, like the president is supporting some kind of competition just recently. I forgot what it was exactly about. We're working together with student initiatives. So this probably might be something, I don't know what your experiences are in Cologne, but also Vanessa or Barbara from your work on getting these collaborations going, like on the one hand, getting people in the institutions and the jobs, but also as a first step, building on collaborations. What do you say?
Well, I can start. Vanessa and myself are working on this together, especially with the Science Center Science Museum community in a collective called Diverse Sci, where it's about tackling this on an institutional level. So yes, there must be people on the front of communicating science who should be as diverse as possible in many different dimensions. But it also goes in the way we do our marketing materials, how we structure activities, what kind of content is there. And yes, if the board or directors are not with this, it will get really, really difficult. So I think that what is often done is that there is one project or one person that this gets loaded to, and in sort of a tick box, we've done it, and that's definitely not what it is. It needs much more effort. And again, I come back, it needs time and commitment.
Yes, in addition to time and commitment, I will also talk about power and money. I think sharing, like co-construction, for example, is about sharing power. and decision making. So it's not just something nice, but it's really deep into how you conceive and how you decide in your organization. And money is who is getting paid, who is a paid partner in a project, who is not. Are gatekeepers, for example, writing down in your project. So are they becoming part of your network, of your team, or is it just a side or an help in the side? So time, money, power. And regarding diversity, it's also looking at yourself and really assess your organization in terms of openness, racism, ableism, and all the ism.
You mentioned a very important word, maybe the most important word, although it shouldn't be for science, money. And there's also one question that might be very interesting, and I don't know if you have any personal experiences on that. Galina was posting the question, how to deal as an organization or as an individual with very small communities that have very specific issues that might need to be addressed. So she asked specifically how to get grants or support for that, but to probably get it on a broader level, like how do you say, how can you balance all these various needs? So things I'm going to step ahead and say, you cannot have a format that reaches everyone equally, because sometimes they're contradicting factors and it's just so broad, you cannot have everything. So how do you prioritize? How do you make sure that that also small groups that might not be reached by the broad aspects can be addressed? Do you have any experiences from your work or your projects?
I'm sorry, could you give an example? What kind of small groups are you thinking of?
For example, so I would guess people with very specific medical needs, or if you think about language minorities, well, of course you can have, for example, take sign language. There is no international sign language. If you offer a sign language translation in European style, someone sign language from another country might not understand it. Or like so many various things, and of course, you cannot have everything together. But
well, I can point you to the work that's been done with Center for Life in Newcastle, where they work with, you said, neurotypical persons, with people from the autistic spectrum. And yes, they need different conditions for connecting. And the interesting thing with most of if you focus on such kind of groups, is that communication gets better for everyone if you care for minority groups. So that's something to keep in mind, but I'll look up the reference and post it. So.
Okay, there's one last question from the audience to that complex, and then I would like to move on. Oh, Patrick, please.
But I think this is an interesting thing, because I would like to ask how many institutions in Germany, for example, have easy language on their homepage. I think there are not many higher education institutions who have decided to speak in the easy language to the target group. And maybe we could change it after such kind of conference here, because it's important. It's easier to understand for the broader public, not only for a small target group, but I think a lot of people need more support to understand the complicated topics in science.
And if I'm allowed to leave my role for 30 seconds, also to probably add something on, because you've seen, like, we don't have sign language translation here. We have an English conference that it's somewhat a lingua franca, but probably not for everyone. And so there are various other aspects. And I think one thing that might be into that we are trying also to do in our events or things that we organize to actively offer support, but offer support helplines. Like, if you have any special needs or requirements, please let us know. We can provide for this and this and that. If you let us know in advance, that we don't book, for example, a translator ahead and then nobody needs it, but somebody else would have needed, I don't know, some different aspect on that event. So of course it puts a bit of the burden back to the audiences, but therefore you can address it to those people who are actually wanting to show up, but only it's solving part of the problem. But the question that I wanted to pose to you from the audience, how to deal with past and present biases against mistreatment of minority groups by the scientific community. So this is something very interesting. There's a lot of discrimination and marginalization going on in society, and you cannot fix that with your science communication format, but you have somehow deal with that because you're working in that system. And specifically also, there are minority groups that have been mistreated by scientific institution, there's a lot of mistrust built up by generations, and that has to be somehow addressed, I guess. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Is Marianne and
Are you sure? You can go ahead, Vanessa. I'll come after you.
okay. I think in the last year, for example, in the assassination of George Floyd, for example, was a good example of how organization and institution did good or bad regarding this subject. Because if you can take a stand, it's quite easy to have to write nice message of support on your front page and on your social media. It's also easy to recognize. Sometimes, depending on the institution, it's not so easy to recognize past mistakes, but that's also something. But it's also about how you treat people in your own institution. Whose voice is valued in your own organization at this moment? Is a PhD student coming from different backgrounds who are mistreated, who are, and I think it's really important to not go into doing statements, but really work internally and question your bias, get trained on your bias and on your power and privilege as an organization, because I think it's something that we don't always realize. We are a very powerful organization, university or science museum, or we have power and sometimes we abuse it, and it's also important to realize that.
Marianne, do you want to add something, or it has been answered?
Yeah, no, I think that was really nice. I guess I would just add to that not trying to hide these histories of science in being suppressing of minority voices, but being transparent about it, I think is probably also an important step forward. Whether these activities are inward in the institution, as Vanessa is sketching out here, or whether you're aiming the activities outwards from the institution. Complete transparency and honesty about this is probably necessary.
Patrick, also want to add something?
Yeah, I would like to say you have to solve this problem with a strong network. It's built up, bottom up and top down, because we have, for example, the University of Cologne, we have some kind of network that's called Unboxing Discrimination. It's about all these kinds of discriminations, dimensions of discriminations like ableism, ageism, everything you know. And it's important to involve the students, the researchers in this field, and also some kind of administration stuff, because you have to have a point you can get information about these topics, and also to get in contact if you need some help. And that's very helpful to find a lot of supporters in the institution to do these.
Thanks a lot. So we have two important aspects I would like to address the last 10 minutes. And if you're okay, I would probably cut down on the closing statements and the finishing remarks by you to have these both aspects addressed in here. And to Carl, it's totally fine to post comments and resources and things, so we totally appreciate that. So no reason to be sorry about that. Switching the topic a little bit, I'd like to post the question that has been on top for a very long time. It's a different aspect. So far we have talked about people who are discriminated against, that who could benefit, or who would want to participate, but discriminated against, left out. So what about the people who actively don't want to be part of it? And it's going back to this whole skeptics question, and couldn't be like going back to the evil domains of marketing. Galina was posting that, and she wasn't framing it that way. Methods from personalized targeting, but also then I'm going to expand on that, probably some kind of talking about nudging, addressing people, maybe also even online, to that methods that might be even taken by disinformation spreaders online. Should science communicators use similar methods, or scientists, to reach these kind of audiences? Yes, please, Marianne.
Thanks. So I'm not an expert on this, but what seems to have become clear throughout the COVID-19 crisis is that denying these people their say, or just kind of dismissing them as tinfoil hats is not the way to get to the root of this misinformation phenomenon. I think there's some people whose minds won't be changed, and we have to accept that they have a voice, and that's it. But I think those who are maybe a little more open, I think dialogue is the way to go. So nobody appreciates being called, a tinfoil hat or a conspiracy theorist. But if you engage with them and you seriously talk with them about what their doubts are about vaccinations or whatever, and you bring your own doubts to the table as well, so engage with them at an eye level, I think if there is a way to address them, then it's probably that way.
Okay, thanks. So all three others also have raised their hands previously. Vanessa, I saw you first. I guess Barbara, then Vanessa, and then Patrick. And also, like, we have try to keep it short. We have this one last aspect we might try to address.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't go for the aggressive methods. I would go for knowing about the algorithms and being aware of them, but I wouldn't go for aggressive. I would also go for dialogue, but also of finding similarities. So people who don't believe in these kinds in science are often very skeptical. And this is a common ground with science, because scientists question themselves all the time. So if you can start a dialogue in saying how science works as a method, this is something where you could find a little bit of common ground, and then from there start a dialogue. And there's a lot of good literature out there on how to deal with that, but it's definitely opening the doors instead of closing doors. And I think aggressiveness is usually with shutting the doors. Thanks.
Vanessa, do you want to add something? Because I had your...
Yeah, very quickly. I think it's really important not to go into crusades, and but you have to. I was raised on the internet by the sentence "Don't feed the troll," and I think this is something also that we still have to keep in mind. And it's not about bending somebody else's mind. And I think Marianne and Barbara said it very well with how we should use a dialogue approach.
Thanks. Patrick?
Totally short. I totally agree with the others, because if others try to manipulate the masses, we don't use the same weapons, because we are scientists.
Thanks a lot. So we have actually two more questions. I think we cannot address both of them. There's one about science idols and then popular persons to use. So I'd like to ask you if you have any thoughts on that. If you would comment them, you can also answer via text in this question box. But the question by Katharina Roswitha about evaluation, and I guess we cannot provide answers how to evaluate science communication. I think that would miss the point here. If you have questions about that, please contact us or me afterwards. But taking on this aspect, like how to deal with evaluation, we talked a lot about, well, target audiences, decided target maybe is not the right point, but somehow audiences, but still the organizations or persons, you need to know who you're talking to about. On an individual level, of course, you can face-to-face interaction, ask people who they are, what their perspectives are. But if you think about an institution, you have to somehow define it. So what are your thoughts on that? Do universities, for example, need to send out 100 students to survey the whole town to have an idea who might be their actual audience? Or I don't know, survey all their online followers on Twitter, what their wishes are, and how do you approach this thing, measuring actually the audience and then thinking about who's missed or not? How do you approach it in your practical work?
I think it's quite easy to know when you start doing science communication, to know who is not there. You walk. I lived in Paris. I take the metro, and then I go to the science center, and the people are not the same. So it's like we don't really need to think about it so easy. I worked in different organizations in Paris, and there are people, families that I've met in my 10 years of doing science communication that are audiences of science communication, because they come to everything possible that is available. So I will be very honest and say we know who's not there, and it's not so complicated. We can name if you want, but is that useful?
Okay. What are the experiences of others also with respect to formalized evaluation afterwards? Because it might get very personal if you have to ask all these potential factors that might influence social demographic factors. Like, do we have to ask people how much they earn in the evaluation form of a science communication format? That might be somewhat strange. Do you do that in your activities?
I will not ask in the survey how much somebody earn, but you know, if you want a qualitative question, for example, you can ask kids, and we've done that in the System 2020 project, how many computer there is in your house, or how many books. So, you know, there is a way of asking those questions. But in terms of demographic, I will not evaluate something that I'm not going to use afterwards. Sometimes I think we collect data that we don't use after. So you should focus on the things that are really useful for your evaluation, not just general data.
Patrick?
I think market research is everything, but we can measure our success by monitoring the media impact, for instance, but it's too simple. We can measure the effects. That's a little bit more problematic, and we need more scientific support to prove what happens really with the work we are doing here.
Any more thoughts on the question of evaluation? Okay, then, oh yeah, Vanessa?
I think the question was also about quantitative and qualitative data, and I will really emphasize the usefulness of qualitative data. And I said it in my presentation. I think sometimes it's objective mind. We think we have to only have some rational elements, but doing interviews, long interviews with participants is a way to capture the impact of your activity without going into quantitative information.
Thanks. Marianne?
Yeah, I agree very much. I think that if we want to acknowledge that there are different perspectives on science and different ways of knowing science and understanding science, then I think it almost precludes us from doing anything else than using qualitative methods, because we need to get at those different understandings, and they won't be found in a questionnaire or any kind of quantitative measure. So I agree completely with Vanessa.
Yeah, I would just again add the listening part, and this can be before or after a science communication activity, listening before. And I don't listen when I do a questionnaire, usually. Usually people don't speak there, but they fill out some kind of preconceived concepts that we might have about the audiences. And in all conversations, some completely different aspects might turn up, which are way more interesting than our preconceived boxes.
Thank you very much. We actually have reached the end of our panel. We couldn't address the last question of regarding the using science communication idols, but I can say you four are my idols. Thank you very much for joining this session and for the discussion. Thank you very much also to all the others in the audience and for your comments and questions. I think it was really interesting. There were a lot of aspects. Some might have not been covered, so please make use, contact them, try to book an appointment. I think it's a really fascinating opportunity. I haven't done it myself yet. And yes, I would say enjoy the rest of the conference, the evening program, and tomorrow the second day. Thank you again to you, and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.